I remember seeing the premiere for Spec Ops The Line following the VGAs in December '09. It promised to take military shooters to a new level by using the environment as an element of gameplay. But the one thing many of us were surprised to find was an extremely engrossing narrative that played with the psychology and themes of Heart of Darkness, written by Joseph Conrad. For the past 10 months, my YouTube inbox has been filled with numerous requests to talk about Spec Ops The Line, the current predecessor of the long-running military franchise.
You said it, not me.
A complete analysis of any type of material takes a considerably long time to finish, and I also don't read other analysis before making a video in fear of inadvertently taking something from another author and embedding it into mine. So this video is going to take a personal look at a particular scene rather than from the full game and talk about why I find it more interesting. The scene I'll be talking about is the final confrontation between Walker and Conrad, aka the ending. Rather than focusing specifically on the actual ending, I'll be talking about Conrad's painting, and how I found it to be reminiscent of the game's themes. As always, bear in mind that this isn't going to be an accurate reflection of the developer's intentions, and instead is simply my own subjective take on the subject matter.
Failure. Death toll.
Remember when the first storms hit Dubai? You're probably all safe and sound at home watching TV. Well, Conrad was leading the damn 33rd out of Afghanistan. Instead of coming home, he volunteered his entire battalion to help with the evac. Bet all you did was send a check.
Now, there are plenty of things going on in the final scene when Captain Walker finally confronts the mysterious and notorious John Conrad. The main one being that Walker is in fact Conrad. The game is pretty conclusive on what actually happened, revealing that Walker is traumatized by his actions as a soldier, most notably the fact that he caused the deaths of innocent civilians. You and I may never know the impact of war on the psyche, but it's made clear by the various media coverage, interviews, and war stories that there is nothing more horrid than reliving the atrocity of a savage conflict. The game even highlights Walker's psychological breakdown through visual changes. One minute, Walker is on the top of a skyscraper when suddenly he finds himself trapped at the bottom of the city with his uniform torn and an absence of sunlight. Now take a moment to look at this painting. This is a Cubist oil painting called Guernica by the Spanish surreal artist Pablo Picasso. This image sparked in my head when I saw the painting Conrad did that summarizes Walker's actions. In Conrad's painting, we see innocent people being killed by the horrors of war. At the center of this painting, the mother cradling her daughter as the white phosphorus kills them. Guernica has a very similar theme to what Conrad's painting encapsulates. Guernica is about the suffering of innocent civilians during war, and how it created misery and fear. On the far left of Guernica is a woman screaming in agony at the death of her child, reflecting the image of the mother and daughter in Conrad's painting. The eye with the light bulb always reminds me of Walker crawling towards the beam of light that looks like the Eye of Sauron.
You said it, not me.
What's most interesting about the symbolism is that some interpretations place the eye in Guernica to be a representation of Guernica's bombing. To put it into context, the painting is inspired by the aerial attack of the town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War in 1937. The bombings resulted in the deaths of an unspecified number of innocent people and soldiers, which again reminds me very much of Walker's use of white phosphorus to wipe out a supposed enemy camp, which in reality also housed numerous civilians. If you look to the far right of Guernica, there's also a person raising from the fire with one hand shaped like an airplane to symbolize the bomber planes. You may recall that one of Walker's first encounters with the survivor of Dubai is on a destroyed airplane. Now, to go away from the painting for a bit, one thing that truly struck me was one of the game's achievements. If you decided to allow Walker to accept his fate and commit suicide, the achievement you unlock is called A Farewell to Arms, which is a reference to the 1929 World War I novel by the same name by Ernest Hemingway, who just so happened to be a journalist during the Spanish Civil War. A Farewell to Arms is much more romantically focused, but it still deals with corrupt soldiers and themes of oppressing civilians. something that's very much present in Spec Ops: The Line. That point aside, Hemingway did write a book inspired by his experiences of the Spanish Civil War called For Whom the Bell Tolls. The book makes recurring references to planes, bombings, and horses, which of course are all evident in Guernica, and both of Hemingway's books follow a very similar symbolic theme. Being the hero is ultimately being the savage. We must commit atrocities to overcome our foes.
Well, fuck you then! I didn't come this far to surrender!
It's the only way inside that tower.
The fuck's sake! Give it up! The mission's over! We failed!
Not while I'm still breathing!
Fine! Then keep breathing!
The last point I want to talk about is something that is only touched on in terms of the human psyche. As said before, you're given the option to commit suicide, which is open to interpretation as to whether it's a definitive ending or not. Death is a high possibility that every soldier is aware of, but For Whom the Bell Tolls touches on the notion that soldiers ultimately accept their inevitable fate when deeply entrenched on the battlefield. The characters in the novel maintain a loyal gesture of wishing to die rather than surrender, in addition to accepting their inevitable doom when faced with heavy opposition. It's human to think this nihilistically in anxious situations, but the conditions of war leave the characters expecting death to come, confirming the deeply troubled psychological effects. There is a suicidal inclination to the characters in both the novel and in Spec Ops: The Line, as they are literally going on a suicide mission. It's not that they want to die, but rather the fact they've become desensitized by the possibility. Walker's suicide is an obvious response to his guilt, but based on the dialogue between him and Conrad, his suicide is actually his acceptance to who he is and what he must become. His suicide is like a captain going down with a sinking ship. He must honor the code and stay loyal to his cause. Thus his death will signal an end to the suicide mission.
Whatever you say, Walker. No matter what happens next, don't be too hard on yourself. Even now, for all you've done, you can still go home. Lucky you.
Hugo isn't our fault.
Don't tell me what I already know. Hugo's blood is on your hands, not mine. Bang.
In conclusion, Spec Ops: The Line aims to bring the horrific image of war to the video game medium by displaying the choices and consequences of moral actions. The line refers to crossing the moral boundaries. The ending brings together the idea that there is no hero or villain, but instead combines the two to show the troubling effects of one individual's actions. Walker is given the heavy burden of making decisions that ultimately leave him with overwhelming guilt. It's a battle between communications and human psyche. He's trying to negotiate and talk through his decisions with someone, but is ultimately talking to himself. You could go further and link this to any political group and the power of decision making, but in this case, it comes down to the marginalization of soldiers who can ultimately feel exploited to do the dirty work. The contrast between Picasso's Guernica and Conrad's painting is a symbolic image on a veteran's emotional cognition. It's a picture that's burnt inside their head. It doesn't help that I, like many lay people, can't relate to the real situations of war that no Call of Duty or Battlefield can visually replicate. War is something many of us perceive differently, but all of us can agree that it never brings about heroism.
Failure. Death toll